Before we get into the presentation, just an FYI for everyone. After listening to the audio from the RTX live stream, I wasn't quite happy with the quality of it. So I went ahead and spent this morning re-recording the audio for the slides. If you're interested in the raw presentation, Q&A and all, regardless of quality, Bambi Helihunter went ahead and uploaded it to his YouTube channel. So we're going to go ahead and put a link here in the video and in the description if you want to check that out. Everything past here, I re-recorded this morning for clarity and quality of sound, so hope you enjoy it. Hey guys, so originally in the RTX program, this talk was listed to cover 0.60, and that's because at the time that we submitted the panel, 0.60 was not out yet. Since it is, only the first portion of the talk will focus on 0.60, exactly what it was and what our goals were, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to move straight into 0.61, which is kind of a focus or a preview on what we're working on right now towards our next stable build. So again, for those that aren't aware, DayZ Early Access 0.60 build hit on the 15th of June, which is last month, and we had over 500,000 unique players trying the build out within that 2-week period. It was a lot more than we anticipated. It was about 200,000 over our usual 30-day average. And again, for those that aren't aware, it represents the first large merge of the Infusion Engine technology, specifically the new DirectX 11 rendering module. The biggest concern prior to that hitting, with the legacy technology, was obviously the frames. And I tried to get a mix here between, please help me, the frames are horrible, to, I want to self-harm myself because the frames are so bad. Our milestone goals for 0.60 obviously was the initial implementation of the Infusion renderer, randomized attachments, specifically on firearms that support attachments. So that would be like your M4s, your AKMs, and so on. And of course, random items in cargo, and that would be specifically items that are spawned, such as, let's say, a backpack or a pair of jeans. Can have random objects, loot items, spawning in them when they're created. So it kind of adds like another level to the looting. You want to make sure to look in all of these objects that you find just to see if the previous owner might have left some food or a pen or something inside them. As far as the randomized attachments specifically, this initial push of this covers all weapon-based attachments and magazines as well, as they're classified as an attachment. Now, firearms that have an internal magazine, currently we don't support spawning ammunition inside them, but it is a goal of ours later on. So an example of that would be the repeater. It has an internal magazine, and on the current 0.60 build, we're not able to spawn a random amount of ammunition inside that, but for weapons that have external magazines, we can spawn random amounts of ammunition in those magazines. So it's one step at a time, but I think it really takes the depth of the world to another level. I mean, being able to find that M4 that looks different each time, hopefully, goes a lot farther than just you run into the same M4 every time, and well, this is a fresh spawned M4. You run across one that's customized a bit, you don't really know whether, was this dropped by someone or was this part of the loot system? And it just moves towards weapon customization. It's one step in that direction. And of course, the new reload mechanics, which are for us moving away from the traditional FPS or Arma-like hit R to reload mechanic. We've moved towards using more of our hotbar as a method of reloading, and R specifically effectively controls the chamber and what is in the chamber, clearing the chamber, chamber in a new round, and so on and so forth. Pulling back the charging handle, clearing the breech on a shotgun, and so on and so forth. These are important. These are important steps towards a more advanced handling of firearms. And of course, 60 players per instance, which, why not? It's 0.60, we're getting 60 frames, why not 60 players? So we have here, I'll go ahead and let this play quickly for those that haven't seen it. This is just the example video of some of the visual updates on 0.60 that we used for the PC Gamer show, the PC Gaming show, I should say, at E3. But enough about 0.60. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 0.61 milestone goals. Now, the server login queue, the first on the list, for those that participated in the 0.60 testing on Experimental Branch, be fully aware of how quickly it became obvious that trying to cram 196,000 people into slots covering 2,000 people without proper server queue technology just it wasn't working. In addition to the fact that the technology wasn't there, there was an actual visible impact on server performance from the constant attempts of connecting and timing out and so on and so forth with players. So this is one of the first things we looked at for 0.61. The ARMA 3 Eden audio technology. For those that follow ARMA's development prior to all the hype about Apex, which is coming out soon, the 11th of this month, they had the Eden update, which included at least in my opinion, a massive improvement on the base technology powering audio in ARMA 3. And since Bohemia benefits from having a significant headcount of people in the company that have been around for quite some time, and a shared, for the most part, a shared code base, the ARMA guys were able to reach out to us and say, "Hey, we know you're working, or we know you have a goal and are working on audio improvements for the Infusion engine. We just finished a huge upgrade for ARMA within the Eden update. Let's start talking about moving this over." Again, thanks to these guys, they were able to come in and lend assistance to our base programming team and work with our audio designer to start moving this over and covering what we would need to do to properly use this technology. And of course, paired with this is the first noticeable update you as consumers will see on the stable branch or experimental branch on Steam, is a complete overhaul on all of our weapon sound. And the technology that comes with this ARMA 3 Eden audio update is going to allow our sound designer to effectively go from having a small toolbox with some creative methods, let's call it developer duct tape, around trying to get what we want out of the legacy audio technology coming from Take On Helicopters, to actually having a robust toolbox of both features and and tech capabilities that real virtuality did not offer us. So this is going to be huge, I think, at least on the audio front of DayZ. And of course, dynamic spawning of infected. Now we were working on this prior to the 0.60 update, but it needed some more polish before it went out. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on, of course, along with all of the rest of these. But this moves from what we had done previously, which is a global spawning, which we'll continue to do, which upon server initialization will spawn X number of infected across the map in the configured areas, to pairing it with an actual configurable dynamic control over certain areas, similar to how the economy and dynamic events currently operate. And the interesting thing is, if you played DayZ mod, you might think that DayZ mod had more infected than DayZ does, but it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? So at the peak of DayZ mod's popularity, at least as I view it, which was somewhere around, I'd say 171 or 172, I think it was. So let's say late 2012, early 2013. You would see probably a maximum somewhere between 400 to maybe 500 active infected in the map. And that's when there's like a lot of players in some of those peak areas where these triggers are set up, configured on areas, on objects to spawn infected when players come in. It was entirely set up so that no infected were spawned where players weren't, and it was only spawned as players approached certain structures or areas. Now, on a pure technical level, you would think that works fine, but that out the gate, besides the fact that we didn't inherit anything other than ideas from DayZ mod, out the gate it was obvious that this allowed for far too much metagaming. I mean, you could just sit outside a town with your binoculars, look in the town. If you see any infected, you know a player's there. And it was one of the initial things we wanted to squash right away. And since we had to start from scratch, we were able to do that. Since we don't support triggers, we stuck with the global amount. And upon launch, I think we hit with, I believe it was 1,000 infected. And now that has gone up and down as we've dealt with server performance and bugs and such. I think the lowest I thought we saw was around 500, and the average was around 700. And I think right now we're sitting around 500, 550 with global spawning and no dynamic spawning. But the dynamic spawning, being able to configure it in a similar way to dynamic events, like police cars and helicopters and such, allows us to do some fantastic stuff that I'll detail a little bit later on. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on just these milestone goals. And of course, predators, specifically for 0.61, it is wolves, and getting the initial implementation of them in. So let's go ahead and take a look at the server login queue. So we have no more login impact on server performance, which is fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, without this technology present, players coming in and connecting to the server could impact server performance. And with the queue in place, we shouldn't see that impact on server performance anymore, which is huge for us, honestly. Obviously, there'll be a UI element informing you of your position in the queue. I think that's critical, instead of just saying you're in the queue, to know how far in the queue you are, so you can judge whether or not you want to wait. The queue size and capacity is a server-level configurable option, and what that means is if you're a server operator, within the server.config, or whatever you define as your config, the server configuration file, there's a value you'll be able to customize there to increase and decrease the size of the server queue capacity. Now let's take a look at the audio engine update. So this was merged to DayZ thanks to some helpful collaboration with the Arma devs. I can't thank them enough. They've really gone out of their way to help us with this, and it just moves the portfolio of the company further even more. A significantly more robust control over how the audio is configured. We have attenuation curves, filters. I mean, you'll see soon, just distance volume attenuation goes a long way. And again, this is a massive upgrade from the legacy RV audio capabilities. And the initial implementation, as I mentioned earlier, will focus on the existing firearms being set up for this new system. So the next slide, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the MP5K, that's our example weapon for this presentation, being fired at 500 meters. And here on this slide, we have the MP5K being fired at 200 meters. And finally, we have the MP5K being fired at 30 meters away. You can see the survivor just in the right corner of the screen there, firing the weapon. Now, dynamic spawning of the infected. As I mentioned earlier, the DayZ mod spawned infected and loot via triggers. Now, it's not a system that we support anymore, so we moved to something that was far more robust and dynamically configurable, the central loot economy and the servlet and its tools. This allowed the mod, as I said, to feel as if there were more infected when there actually weren't. Going out the gate, we moved away from the triggers, and we do handle this as a global spawn. So upon server initialization, there's the infected are spread out between all the configured areas globally, regardless of whether or not players are there. And the areas on this new system are able to be configured with the zone generation tool for a minimum and maximum per player. So what that means is essentially, let's take Zelenogorsk, and let's say one player enters Zelenogorsk. Now, there's already, before he gets there, there's the base amount of infected that might be there. And when he enters the area defined in this tool, the minimum and maximum potential infected spawn per player are checked. And X number of infected are spawned within a certain radius of him within this area because he enters. As other players enter, they can spawn more, so that the higher the group of players, the higher the saturation of infected, as if they're drawn towards these players. And the restock or respawn value, however you want to call it, will allow players to actually clear an area out. They're not going to continue to again and again infinitely spawn. There will be, depending on how it's configured, a good amount of infected, and you'll have to spend time to clear it out. But it's possible to actually clear out and make an area safe until the respawn timer allows for a respawning of infected in that area. And this is a brief little look at the early version of the zone generator tool being used to configure the dynamic spawning of infected. Now, what we have here on this next slide is, and it might be dark on your monitor depending on the brightness, so you might want to switch to a different monitor if it appears too dark. But this is just an example of the dynamic spawning while we were still working on it run a bit crazy. This is before we switched over to the new infected models, but this is a single player continuously spawning infected in Svetlo. Now, all of these infected are spawned via the dynamic spawning and not via the global spawning that normally happens. So for Predator AI, or specifically wolves, this will be our first implementation of Predator AI within DayZ. The wolves should operate in a pack, as you will see soon. The saturation of population will need to scale as we move forward. As with infected AI, we will need to slowly increase based upon the performance of the server as we see it. And again, server performance is a constant priority focus for us. So up next, we have an example video here. Please be kind. This is a developer. He's not as good at DayZ as some of you guys are, but I think he holds his own versus a pack of wolves. Now, granted, he does have an automatic weapon, but this gives you an example of very early implementation of the pack mentality of these wolves, focusing on a lone player and their tactics as he begins to take them on. So that's it for the RTX presentation. Now I'm still waiting for the audio from the Q&A to come back to me, and we'll work on getting that posted as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to start sharing these in-game on the DayZ Dev Team YouTube channel.